I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar series of the Cybersecurity and Information Systems Information Analysis Center, or CSIAC. Our presentation is entitled Securing Your Company for Today's Cyber War, a three-pronged approach to a comprehensive IT security strategy. My name is Steve Warzala. I'm the CSIAC Outreach Manager. A few administrative notes before we begin. First, all phones have been muted except for the presenters. Questions may be asked at any time during the presentation by utilizing the chat function, and time permitting, your questions will be answered at the end of the session. Today's briefing slides will be posted on our website within a few days. And finally, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, the Defense Technical Information Center, DTIC. The funding that DTIC provides enables CSIAC to conduct these webinars. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Mr. Peter Allor. He is the Senior Security Strategist for IBM Security. Peter has been instrumental in developing IBM's strategy for securing critical infrastructures, central government operations, and certifications. Mr. Allor focuses on developing solutions that integrate the full spectrum of security operations within an organization's domain in support of business. In his previous role, Peter was managing vulnerability and incident coordination for the IBM X-Force. I'll now turn the presentation over to Mr. Allor. Good afternoon, Peter. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Steve, and thank you for this opportunity, and welcome to everyone. And for those who are in Europe, good afternoon, and we'll just jump into the presentation. Now, one of the things that Steve didn't mention is I'm a retired military officer, so I have a tendency to look at things from a perspective of what is the attacker, what is the defender, and what do I need to do? And to do that, I look a lot at intelligence from a perspective of what is the intent or what is the capability, and then how do I react? And I think in many instances, we all do that. We just don't use those same terms. So here's a little bit about today's agenda. I want to talk about is it a cyber war briefly, and then how do you make your own strategy work for you? How do you have visibility of operations, and what do you do about situational awareness? First of all, where do I come from? Well, I belong to IBM Security. IBM is a very large security brand. Most people are, we're the sneak attack in here, if you will. 6,000 people working across all these global centers. The green dots indicate our security operations centers, where we man 24/7 and provide monitoring and managed services for security of various organizations. And you can see the number of endpoints protected and the 20 billion events per day managed, things of that nature. We have security research centers where we have actively focused personnel working on malware through vulnerabilities, IP reputational, and things of that nature. In fact, we scan the internet about 12 billion URLs, if I remember correctly, across the entire internet. And our security development centers are about developing the products that we use. So here's another wrap up to look at it a little bit easier. Notice on the right hand side, 96,000 vulnerabilities. We've maintained a vulnerability database since 1998. Very comprehensive. And we score all those vulnerabilities for CVSS if they're not already scored. If they are scored, we look at them again. And we track them by bug ID, CVE, what have you. So that's where I'm coming from, is this depth of coverage, this broad skill set, globally dispersed. So, is this a cyber war now or not? I hear everyone talk about, oh, cyber war, cyber war, cyber war. What does that mean? Truly, if you look at the definitions underneath treaties, there is no current universally accepted terminology for cyber war. It's a made-up term. I guess if you look at it from the broad perspective of physical war, the guy getting shot at sees incoming as war. But that doesn't define it technically as a war. In our case, we have attacks happening every day. We don't know if it's a war or not. And for most of us, it doesn't matter. The intent is stop the problem, not necessarily know who is always attacking us. But if we look at it from the perspective, is it a cyber war? And you look at the elements of national power, I would tell you right now that we are underneath economic duress or economic warfare. And if you see that as part of your national element of power, no matter what country in the world you're from, then you see this as a form of warfare. Okay, so what does that mean for us? Well, in the essence is, we're under attack, we need to respond. We can't sit there idly while someone else is under attack for one reason. Because everyone's part of someone else's supply chain, we may be the next attack victim. So if you look through the data sets that we've collected as IBM, we saw some key trends in 2015. First, there's a focus on high-value targets. And by that, we mean very specific industries and very specific individuals. Take, for instance, the Anthem Blue Cross attack and OPM. You start cross-referencing, you start getting some very interesting pieces of information that put people at risk. And why is that important for any organization? Well, if your people are under duress, they're being targeted, whether specifically spearphished or they're being recruited as an asset for someone for economic espionage, whether it's industrial or otherwise, you have a problem. Breaches without borders. Very simply, people are being attacked regardless of where the organization is at. And in some cases, because the organization crosses those borders. So it doesn't matter who is attacking who, it's almost like a free-for-all firefight. The sophistication of attack techniques, of course, has moved from just the domain of only a nation state across all of the organized crime approaches into our organizations. So we all see this as a problem that ends up in we need to have our security basics taken care of. A phrase I often think about is, remember the phrase, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just got to outrun his next food source. Well, in some ways, that's the same. The same as in physical crime, you have to become a slightly hardened target so that the criminal goes to the next easy victim. So what challenges are we facing across the board? Well, simply, when you speak with executives, they'll tell you, I don't know how to measure my effectiveness. I have no means to dashboard my effectiveness. And in some ways, as security professionals, we put ourselves into a bit of a trick because we talk in technology and we talk in bits and bytes and IPv4 and IPv6, and an executive goes, what is he talking about? Give me something plain. So we have to speak clearer, and we have to be able to show, when you invest, what's the effective outcome. The other problem that we're seeing across the board is IT professionals have no risk strategy. Oh, interesting. We as professionals are not thinking through the problem. I haven't gotten to what is the business part, just what is it we're doing from an IT professional. And then across the board, everyone's talking about, I don't have enough skilled people. I can't find the right skilled people to fill the spaces I have. So I'm turning to other means. I'm looking for simplification of my security. I'm looking how do I outsource. I'm asking where do I find these trained individuals. Let's talk a little bit about high-value data sets. Here I'm talking just about data breaches. And you can see the size of these circles indicate the size of a data breach. And the colors indicate the type of attack. And the trend that we're seeing from 2013 into 2014 is growing. A 20% change in a bad way. 2015 it continues, but you see now the focus from anyone's attack to where are my high-value targets. The question now is, where's your data set in there? I would ask the question, if you look at the yellow, for instance, SQL injection. How long have we known about SQL injection? And yet we see SQL injection still continuing. Is it preventable? Yes. Who's a vendor? We all are. But I tend to say, well, some vendor has to patch, and we forget that as we build applications, websites, and data sets to go with them, because that's how we service our customers, that's how we work with our partners, that we have to test. So all that secure development lifecycle is something that we all have to approach. Yes, DDoS is an external problem set, but now you have to be able to coordinate. Who do I talk to upstream? How does my provider help me? Do I have a DDoS mitigation service? What does that really do? And of course, malware, the perennial problem that we all have come to face, and we wonder, well, this doesn't work. How do we compete? So that's all the personal data sets that we've seen there. What about the vulnerabilities? What about all the other problem sets that aren't reported because they don't have mandatory reporting? That's the big question, because there are no easy statistics to point to there. But we can say this. This is what it costs per record to fix a data breach. These are regulated industries. So I would postulate here that regulation does not equal the ability to protect a record. It does cost in taking care of the aftermath, but it doesn't necessarily protect. Don't take the message, though, that all regulation and compliance efforts are for naught, but they're a snapshot. They're a point in time for a particular reason. And so we have to make sure that while we account for compliance, we've actually done real security. And it's something that we can flex with the threat, because the threat evolves every day. It flexes in a moment. Every time there's an update, there's a patch. There's an adjustment to the attack profile. This is just a snapshot of what we saw in 2013 about the problem, just talking with our customers. This is off of data that we own. And the issue that I want to point to is, if misconfigured systems was 42% of the problem, and 6% was vulnerable code. In other words, somebody had malcode in there in the instance of, I didn't patch, therefore it's malcode. Or there's end user error in clicking and installing apps that aren't verified and validated or checked, or may not be from a reputable source. That's nearly 80% of the problem. That's what we would all call low-hanging fruit. Now, where is the discussion? The discussion is about the target attack, 6%. And if you're in that type of industry where that's an important issue, that's an important number. But the reality is, to escape the bear, we can prevent about 80% of the problem. The question is, what's our program? Now think about mobile, the new laptop of the environment that we're working through. The opportunity right now for the attacker, for the underground, to overlay malware into your mobile applications, and with that, be able to have credentials that work not only on the mobile device, but gain access to your network, is the issue we have to deal with now. And the criminals are smart enough to realize that you go for the common apps that have the broadest penetration of the marketplace and the most likelihood of being able to get in. So now it comes down to, how do you segregate these? How do you put these into a sandbox? How do you make sure that credentials are stored properly? And that's what the whole issue comes down to. Now to vulnerabilities. Let's not forget them. We notice that we're averaging almost 8,000 vulnerabilities per year for the last 5 years. Actually, a little bit better now. What does that mean? I have 5,000 problems I have to look at. And the problem that we're looking at is every vulnerability, and we have to have an intelligence service for every vulnerability. And the question you have to ask is, how many of these are actually exploitable? It used to be back in 2009, almost 12% were exploitable vulnerabilities. You know, that figure has now dropped to just under 6%. So 6% of the 8956, boy, that makes it a little bit easier, 537. That's what you really need to look at. When you look at the 537, I would challenge you that you have all those applications in your environment. The question is, do you know? Which ones? Because you could probably cut that number almost in half and take it down to around 275, maybe 300 that you really have to look at. Now, you've come down to one a day. It's something you can focus on. And this is what we need to think through as security professionals. Otherwise, the war is going to be one-sided. So, when you look at vulnerabilities and how they're used, let's just look at data sets, because that's where data breaches are happening. It's a pretty easy one to look at. Notice most people don't know the source of their data. They don't have an asset inventory. So now it's a lack of knowledge of our own environment that is getting us. And which vendor do we have? At which version? At which patch level? That's what we are lacking. And without the ability to scan and say, we have this information, we're now enabling the bear to run faster than we are. So, enough about what the problem is. Let's talk about how do we get there? How do we fix things? What does this mean for us? I think simply we need to look at what is our strategy? Or to put it another way, how do we protect, detect, and respond? And that's really the key words. And I say that because I work a lot in incident response, and I think if you look at incident response and frameworks, you're going to come down to a pretty stark realization. That's really what everyone's talking about. Now, there's some assets that you have to figure out, but let's work through that. First of all, we need to talk to the business. When we talk to the business, to gain their support, we need to know what their language is. And if you notice the difference between a CEO and a CIO and a chief marketing officer, you're seeing that they're all looking at this from a different perspective. We, the security professional, have to be able to understand that's their perspective. Because when we can say, I can help you with, employee privacy, you have their ear. When you say, I can reduce your legal exposure, I have their ear. Because they care about that. What they want to know is, okay, how can you enable me and my business to protect our assets and continue to grow? So we have to be able to talk that. And the board and the C-level suite will ask for a strategy. We just need to help them articulate it, because the reality is they need to help own the strategy. When we come to the CISO and IT security professionals, we start talking down in very, very specific areas. Guess what? When we start talking these specifics and we go deeper technically, we're finding that we start to lose management. So we need to simplify this into something that they can quickly understand and translate into business needs. Yes, we need to do this. Don't drop this, but we need to articulate it differently. When you look at the state of cybercrime, in the survey here that was done with CSO and the Secret Service and Carnegie Mellon, they've identified 8 common deficiencies. I highlighted the first one: no strategic approach. Okay. And look at the other one, number 3, supply chain risk. Cybersecurity risks are not sufficiently assessed. So what we're seeing is we don't have a program in many respects that is easy to demonstrate, show, and is repeatable. That's really what we're talking about. This entire thing is very indicative of why the Executive Order 13636 came about from the President of the United States. And if you notice, it was the first time that cybersecurity ever was mentioned in a State of the Union, one sentence, in 2012. 2013, a little bit more, and the Executive Order was published. That came out to then NIST coming up with a framework. and that was delivered in 2014. And currently, NIST has just finished the RFI, and we'll have another meeting on it in another week here in Gaithersburg, Maryland, to talk about revisions. Why is this important? Well, the government was trying to find a way to talk to all of us in the private sector. And not only is this a discussion here in the United States, but this has gone across, like in the UK, you got the Cyber Essentials. You go to Australia, and they got the ASD 35 and the top 4. And what does that mean? But everyone's still now talking about risk and how to approach this. And the one thing that we from private sector have asked for is don't mandate something in one government that another government's going to do differently. Give us an ability to articulate our risk based on our business, and if we need to subdivide within our business, how do we do that? That's what the NIST framework is about. So it's when you look at risk frameworks, there's a portion of people, and it's becoming a smaller portion, but it's still a rather large number. It's just under 40%. They don't have a strategy at all. And I would submit that if you need to do a risk framework or a strategy on how I'm going to tackle the problem, a process or incident response process framework like NIST security framework is great for you, because it walks you through the entire incident response framework, and you have to start with identify, which is your task of assessing what you have in your environment. You go to a domain-based, I'm going to show the IBM one because I'm slightly partial. We took an abstraction of COBIT 4.1. And now we talk about people, data, applications, and infrastructure. And that's a domain-based. And in many ways, I think this is really where a lot of us have to look for part of our solution, because we have a tendency to stovepipe what we do for our identity and access management away from what we do for database management, away from what we do for our network or endpoint protections. And because they don't communicate, we run into a problem that we're not integrated, and it's hard to articulate what our strategy is. When you go around to the sectoral framework, you're really talking about compliance stuff. You know, think about NERC SIP. Think about some of the things going on in financial services or in energy in the way of oil and gas and pipelines, and how public service commissions all influence that. And you see that they have specific requirements. So when we wrote this white paper about this inside IBM, I really focused our fact on that. As an organization, we're going to use some of process, some of domain, and, if required, our sectoral compliance or regional compliance, depending upon where we operate, and make it our own. Notice it's our strategy. But I put one additional bubble in there, which is smart architecture, which is where IT security and IT operations execute, and they're part of the circle. When you go to the organizational part, remember one thing. The organization owns the strategy, not IT. It's not our business. We support their business. And then you got to do a review and assessment. So that's how you approach it. So when you have an organizational framework, you have some base characteristics about what you do in a way of tying out all those different bubbles together that support the business and the business conditions. And in there, as you evaluate, you can then say, I'm willing to accept this level of risk. That's a business decision. And when a business unit decides that they need to do something that's outside that, there's an exception process over there that does not require IT to figure it out. IT and IT security execute on it. They support that, but it's a business-owned problem set. And that's where a lot of business owners, the executives, are missing this approach. When you talk about it, it makes sense, but you have to start the conversation for them. Okay? So, one of the things you have to make sure when you go through your strategy, though, is realize that the threat will change, the business will change, the economics will change, regulation changes, and of course technology, and then where the business is going in the way of geography and facilities. All those will change your risk. They'll also change your acceptance of risk. And so you may be at a higher level currently today, but you moved to a new geography, acquired a business, or the economics change, you may find that your risk or your current profile dropped. That's part of business. You may decide that, hey, I'm going to institute ISO 27002, and you need to evaluate yourselves periodically, because if you stay static and say you're always at one level, then I question how well you're evaluating yourself, how honest you're being within the business, and how much the business is participating. So take a look at, if you look at the NIST Framework, identify as one of the core elements, and then you have categories and subcategories. Well, I'm going to give you a suggestion that you actually could fill out this template. And if you just remove the term IBM offers and put what do you have for your products there, and you put in whatever that product is that matches that, you'll find that you're actually on the road. You actually have some level of capability. You just never mapped it to go back against the NIST framework. And you can say, hey, listen, I follow the NIST framework, or I've adapted the NIST framework to meet my needs, and here's how I can stack it up. And I can say at what level of risk I'm at and how I'm integrating those product sets. And this just take a look at the protect level, just to give you a quick idea of what is there. And I know the slides will be available for you afterwards, so you can take a look at that and say, hey, I have awareness and training. I have my third-party stakeholders understand their roles and responsibility, and here's how I get there. Here's how I do my GRC to make it work. So situational awareness. You know, you watch Top Gun, you watch how they fly around, and they're constantly swiveling their head around. They're checking their instruments. They're looking at their radar. They're taking incoming data from the carrier. What does that mean? That's all part of bringing together situational awareness. You want to talk in government terms. You want to talk in terms of a private sector, it's security intelligence. It's your security operations tied together. It's integrating all that. And what you're doing is you're trying to detect what is going on in your environment. When you do it, you're trying to address trends. So it's not just I have a server farm anymore. I'm trying to address those advanced threats. I'm working or I'm provisioned in the cloud, or I have an outsourced provider for the cloud. I'm tying together my mobile stuff. I realize I have IoT from building automation through electrical substations on my property or my facilities. I need to take care of that. And I know I have to take care of my compliance issues. And I'm trying to do this while I'm still short of people. So you're tying together what your entire portfolio is across your domains, and you're overlaying your incident response and how you're getting that security, whether you're doing internal security intelligence and assessing the threat and gathering your own information, or you subscribe to someone else's service, you're bringing that in, and you're trying to integrate your process for security to provide situational awareness. Because once you do that, you start to be able to dashboard back to your executives what's going on, and you show that you have an IT security strategy. Now they see a strategy, they see a return on investment, and you can say, I have a gap for your identified risk. I need to acquire a capability. Or we have to change our risk posture. And it becomes a decision for the business instead of you arguing for every scratch and nick to get something to cobble together. So, you want to look at it another way? I'm showing you right here on the right-hand side the Department of Homeland Security program based off the Department of State program on continuous diagnostic and mitigation, CDM. And there's 3 phases they have. And I think it's a really good program they have, and I'll bet it's being implemented way too slow. There's such largesse there. I don't know how to sometimes overcome that system, but if you look at the 3 phases and what they're trying to do on the left, you're seeing it's the same thing in approaching a security strategy with a domain profile, putting incident response in there. I won't say it's new, it's an approach. What's important is that you have the ability to borrow from people's systems and approaches to build part of your strategy and how to get there. And the whole key here is, how do you defend the cyber war? How do you not hemorrhage that money? So, integrating with operations and security leaders and across the business. How do you respond? How do you make all this work together? Well, first is you have to realize, as we did a study back in 2012, whether you're a responder, you just respond to events as they happen, or are you protectors and you're prioritizing your security strategy, but you don't have everything you need, or you're an influencer and you really have everything going and the business is strategically supporting that because they see it's essential to being a competitive differentiator. And in essence, excuse me, that's where it starts to make sense to a business. It's a competitive differentiator. You are securing yourselves and your customers for the advantage of showing that you are the supplier of choice. It's a differentiator. And you notice on the right-hand side where the differences are about having a CISO, a risk security community. Look, this is 2 years before the NIST Framework came out. A standard set of security metrics to track. In other words, you find a way to track and then be able to dashboard, and you talk and collaborate across the business. That's a change from what a lot of folks are doing. We're seeing this trend happening. We see the uptake. We're seeing some very successful corporations take this and be able to make it their own. So look at it this way in the maturity. You have to be able to assess, do I have just basic stuff? And is that sufficient for my need? Or do I need to be proficient, or I need to be optimized? I mean top tier. You can look at it from the NIST implementation tiers of 1 through 4. It's the same concept there because we help influence that. But you need a way to be able to measure and show to management that, hey, we see this as a base level, and it meets what we are right now, but our future needs are actually greater. We need to have a program to get there. And you need to figure out what meets that for the business. Or I should say, you need to help the business figure out what meets their needs for risk. So you look at the incidents, how do you do the basics? Well, if you notice I talked about you have to identify your assets. In many respects, you can also instrument your assets to detect. That's an important part because it's not the simple unblocking just a piece of virus from 5 and 10 years ago. It's a matter of saying, this entered my firewall and it touched on this database with this identity and tried to access that, and I see that my IPS did something, and you're correlating an event together. To do that smartly, you actually have to know what the threats are. So you need to be talking with others, whether you're paying for the feed or you're working within your industry about what that is. And then you always have to know what your assets are. If you don't know those assets, you don't know what, if you know that X number of laptops of different OSs and mobile devices are there, then you'll never know not only the hardware, you won't know the software, you won't know the configuration, and you won't have an identity, you won't have identified the vulnerabilities that you're susceptible to, and therefore you'll never have a program to harden your facility, harden your business. And then when you get past that, that's all phase 1 of CDM, you got to get into identity governance and know what that is and enforce that and be able to watch and protect privileged users. And as I said, you're going to protect them while they work for you and protect your business. It's a two-way street. It's not just we're going to monitor you. It's a matter of you're going to make sure that they have the tools to manage your affairs properly. And then you got to be able to patch everything. There has to be a way to identify and roll out patches so the user's not doing it. User is admin, bad business. That's exactly what the underground wants. And then so for the place where you can't patch, you have to have mitigating controls. You have to block something from accessing that machine and owning it. And then there will be an incident, so you have to have an incident response plan. Another way to look at it, how are you going to block the attack chain, both at the endpoint and at the network? And this is a very base level if you look at it, because I'm not talking through all the identity and access management and governance issues, nor all the SIM. I'm talking about just preventing exploits, malware, and users from doing things they ought not to when they're not at their brightest moment because it looked like a legitimate click and it's an executable. Other things to do with the network, administrators can do a lot to help executables from getting in, because most of us in normal business have no need for that. But I will say it is clear that educating users, while short-lived, has a really high effect. So you have to know if you're cyclically attacked, what do you do to change the message? How do you keep it creative, inventive? I fly one particular airline, I won't mention which one, but what I like about their videos is they've made it interesting enough that they change the video. I look to see where the changes are. Guess what? I'm watching the safety video. It's the same concept that we need to use for talking to our user base, because we use the same, don't share your password, don't share your password, don't share your password every day. They're not going to pay attention to don't share your password. The message is lost. So at some point in time, we're all going to experience this problem. We've been hacked. That means you have to be able to do a lot of different things. One is you have to have an incident response plan. Two, you have to have the data set that your incident responders can work from. Because if you don't have data captured and you're able to replicate the packet capture and what took care in the entire session, then your ability to do any forensics drops off significantly, even if you bring in the high-class folks for doing the forensic review. They have to have data to work from. And from there, they'll be able to move elsewhere into what is happening in your structure that you're unaware of. All of a sudden you have a server that's talking outbound when it's never designed, at least architect, for talking outbound. It's just an internal server. It's development. It's not supposed to touch other things. And it's doing encrypted communications out and doing DNS queries. Wow, something that you want to be aware of. And you need to know how to capture that, because it's not just the fact that it talked outbound and to whom. It's a question of who was it talking to internally, at what times, and what was it collecting, that you can begin to figure out what it may have touched. See, if you can't crack the encryption, you got to know what was the potential loss and what do you do to mitigate that and what it does to your business. So that's part of our action plan that we need to have. When you look at it, taking the session, here's what you're talking about in the way of reconstructing, because all this is part of what a forensics team will need to figure out exactly what a sophisticated threat was doing in your environment. I'm not saying that you can't block advanced and sophisticated attacks. I'm saying that you can block a lot of them, but one will eventually get in, and you have to be able to detect it before it gets anything out, especially of value. And this is why you need to have all this type of data reposited somewhere, in the ability to review and forensically go through it. And you don't have to have everything in full deep packet 6 months and 10 months ago at your fingertips, but you have to have a way that you can go back and take a look at it. I like to say, hey, anytime you talk with a group, you need to be able to give something that is always free. And so here are some things I think that people should do to help mitigate threats and have on hand at all times. Threat intelligence, how you collect it or how you gain access to it. The point is that's not the important part. The point is that you actually have some threat intelligence. You have a view that when you're looking at 8,900 vulnerabilities, that out of that maybe 250, 300 are the ones that you need to pay attention to, because that's what you have and those are the exploitable. That's important. And then against your current asset inventory that's why it's important and at what level they are. And then if you know what the keys of the kingdom are, then your ability to know what patching you need to have immediately, or that you have a chance to wait because you can do a compensating or mitigating control, that's what you're talking about. So that gives you a broad approach for a plan, and there goes back to your strategy. And that's what the business is looking for, is that you have a strategy to respond, you have a strategy to protect, you have a strategy to detect. And then it all works together. So I guess at this point, I'll go ahead and ask, what are your questions, and work from there.
Okay, thank you, Peter. If any of our attendees have some questions, just shoot them to us on the chat. But I'll get the ball rolling with. So you talked about the strategy aspect, which which I think is quite important, because otherwise you're just kind of dealing with problems on a ad hoc, haphazard basis. Just as they're kind of hitting you, you're kind of you're trying to swing back, but you may not necessarily be dealing with the most important problems or the most important issues. So I think the notion of taking the big picture, looking at the big picture, and developing your strategy from there, I think is a key aspect in the way to attack this problem.
Yeah, often what we see, Steve, is we've grown into our situation both with how we grew our IT, and a lot of times we deploy technology before we have an understanding of how to best protect them, and before the bad guys have an understanding of how to attack it, which usually they attack before we protect is the normal mode. Right. And because of that, we've done a point product approach, and we've never connected all those defenses together, and we've overly staffed them, and so we have to relook, is that the best approach?
Yeah, and I think the folks, if they don't have a good handle on their infrastructure, if they're if they haven't done that good self-analysis to know what their assets are, as you were doing your presentation, for some reason, Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry came to mind, and it was the man. Man's got to know his limitations. So you've got to get in there and see where your where your systems are and what their status is. You had the one chart up there with identifying these different vulnerabilities, and I think 80% of the problems that we face are kind of self-inflicted by systems not being set up right in the first place, not being properly configured. We're using patchy software and applications, or buggy software and applications, and then we're all human, and we click on things and go, oh, I wish I didn't do that, and then we try to have to deal with those consequences. So and then the other thing that I think that hit me too in your charts was the you had the thing about about half of the IT executives don't have good metrics. They're not sure how to measure their effectiveness. So are they throwing too much security at a problem and it's overkill, or are they way underprotected and leaving themselves open to critical attacks? So I think that's another issue that needs to be highlighted to some folks too.
Yeah, I think, Steve, your phrase of we focus on the infrastructure is in fact part of our problem, because we should be focusing on the data. Not all data is equal, and some data is very, very particular because it's our secret sauce, it's our customer information, it's our employees' information. It's sensitive to how the business is operating and its projections, and puts at a competitive disadvantage if leaked. So those become your important things to protect. And if you focus on the data, Then your question is, how do I protect that data, and then the systems that the data resides on, whether it's an application or it's an operating system. So you run into that same problem set there of what are you working through? And I think from the executive perspective, we're finding before it was, I spent too much and I don't think I'm going to need to return this, so maybe I ought to quit. And now you're seeing the discussion around cyber insurance and how do I show that I'm actually insurable at a rate that's justifiable, that if I actually, took a breach of some sort, that I'm reasonably protected and I'm not unreasonably out there where it becomes a litigation issue. So it becomes more of the data protection as opposed to the rest.
Yeah, and you brought up the insurance issue, which was something that I had wondered about too. I was kind of wondering, at the board level, if folks are getting to a point where it's like, whether they would just rather go the insurance route and assume that they're going to get attacked and there's going to be a breach and let the insurance handle it, as opposed to worrying about trying to come up with the technology to protect themselves, prevent it in the first place. So and then we've seen over the last few years we've seen some major breaches. So I was just kind of wondering what the sense was, if you saw any trends that way, where leaning towards the insurance route versus taking the technology approach more seriously. Have you seen any trends one way or the other?
Yeah, insurance-wise, of course, we're looking for more data for better actuarial so they can better assess risk. But what that actually is leading to is not that, hey, I abandon the technology and I just buy the insurance and therefore I'm okay. It actually drives you in the opposite direction. To get the insurance to get the better rate and to be better protected, because I'm in the supply chain and people are asking, or they're buying my product and they're asking how secure I am or how secure the product is or my service, then what they're doing is they're actually applying focused approaches on protecting the domain and the data, and the infrastructure, of course, is the mechanism that they use to get there. But they're focused towards the data and the fact that they have to do it to get the better insurance rate. And that becomes very important, because as they do that, the insurance companies start asking very specific questions, which in some ways, I noticed in someone's question here about KPIs, and those become the KPIs. Do I have data encrypted in transmission? Do I have data encrypted at rest? Do I have the database locked down? Do I have data alarming turned on? Do I have IPS around it? Do I have firewall rules that disallow certain things or allow other things? Or are whitelisted, or do you have a blacklist? Those all become things that are becoming very metric, if you will, and actuarial is going to follow that line. So you're finding that insurance is actually going to help drive the market, and in many ways, I think the administration sees that as an important part to driving the market is how do we approach the insurance point. So that becomes very important, and then you'll see people start applying intelligence to that as a next level of a KPI, and then what kind of IP reputational indicators of compromise, or IOCs as we call them, do we look at? And the problem is that if you look at just very narrow aspects, you actually miss the larger picture. So it's very, very much in flux right now, because to me, I like an IOC, great. Tell me what the campaign is about, what they're really, the intent of that campaign. Is it to steal customer Social Security numbers or EINs, or is it to steal my secret sauce? Because I'm going to apply my response differently, and I'm going to adjust my risk profile, and therefore what I do is security based on the campaign, not the IOC. The IOC is too granular.
That's an interesting. I hadn't thought about the insurance costs versus how safe and secure you are in the first place. But I guess that goes back to your auto insurance. I mean, if you've had a lot of accidents, your rates are going to go up. So it's interesting where trying to get cybersecurity insurance, would drive a company to actually improve their security posture. So that's an interesting take that I hadn't thought about. So there was another question we got from our attendees. There's a question about cloud storage, utilizing the cloud. How does that fit into a company's overall security posture? How do you see that playing into this into the environment?
Cloud's an opportunity in a couple different respects, and I won't go into all the business opportunity. I'll go into security opportunity. How often do you get a chance to walk into a clean slate and design how you're going to protect your data? Think about that for a second. If we were to change what we're doing now in distributed computing, where we already are pre-existent, we've been running 5, 10, 20, some almost 30 years with what we have, and you look at it and say, how do I change this and protect the data? You've got to knit a lot of things together. When you flip over to cloud, you have the opportunity to bring your stakeholders together and design what you're going to do and how much risk you're willing to take. And when you look at it from that perspective, you go, wait a minute, there's a lot of opportunity here. And then you can put in contractual, because you're short on staff, here's what I'm looking for in the way of maintenance. And my service level agreement for patching, updating, and implementing controls, and here is how fast I need to be alerted to changing situations, problems, and attacks. So now you were able to design your response, your level of risk that you're going to take, the level of security you need to wrap around it. And so if it's just, everyone's going to comment on today via cloud thing about the weather and the latest cooking recipe you have, well, you want to protect the identities there a little bit, but how much more do you really need? But when you're talking about, listen, here's how I'm going to design this new component that's going to be the next new tech gadget, or it's how I'm going to change and do a new medical device, I now have an opportunity to say, I need to protect this. I need to be able to protect the application. I need to know that the infrastructure is well protected, and I'm gonna make sure that that's part of my contractual relationship. And then I'm gonna say, here's my data, and here's the identity and access control I need. Here's how I need to protect the privilege. Here's my data flow. So now I know who's going to access the data and how much access they really need. So you change the entire approach in the cloud, and it's while the application is important, if you focus on the application, you're missing what you're really protecting. You're protecting the data. So focus on the data and then see what the level of application protection you need and what other controls and protections you need around it.
So it almost sounds like, if a company was thinking about, moving towards a cloud or utilizing the cloud, that almost might flow back up into the strategic process that, they may be able to, like you said, they've been doing things the same way for 20 or 30 years. It may be an opportunity to take, this strategic, high-level look and try and do things in a better, more efficient way. So they may get some advantages from moving in that direction as well.
I would bet when you ask the question, the company says, how secure is the application? They're saying, IT, tell me how well this is secure. And the question comes back is, what is it that you want to do on the application, and how do you want that to be secure for the business? And notice now, all of a sudden, it's not IT securing an application. It's the business saying, here's the amount of risk I can take on this data set. And now IT and IT security know how to design the protection, because now it's a matter of I need to do a FISMA level or a NIAP level protection on the application because it's that much required, or I need to do an outside pen testing and I need to put identity and access controls on it. I need to have database security on it. I need to do some encryption, and that's sufficient. Or I need to have an IPS outbound and inbound on it. Those are different because now you're focused on the data, not on the application, and now you're focused on the business, not on IT trying to guess at what you're trying to do.
Yeah, you've stated it a few times, and I think it's a very important point that not all data is created equal. You have the crown jewels that you want to prevent at all costs. You don't want to lose those or have them taken. And on the government side, they have what they refer to their mission essential functions that they want to be able to perform at all costs. And then also, with the government DoD perspective, you have your different security clearances. So once again, data is viewed in different manners. It may be totally unclassified, or it may be top secret. So like I said, I think your point about the data is key. That's the that's what everything really revolves around. So I think that's I think that's a very important point that you've brought out in your presentation today. So, well, we're kind of getting near the end of the time. Unless folks have any other questions, there's another one on KPPs or KPIs. Are there key risk indicators that you can suggest, Peter?
Wow, that's a broader discussion in the fact of where you're operating, because now you're talking about Steve, you just talked about categorization of data and data sets. So you have to have a categorization of your data set, and you know that. And then for your risk indicators, it really comes down to what are your assets, and what's the level of inventory. So, for instance, if you're an organization and let's say you're running an operations technology, or some people call SCADA, and that machine runs on a Windows 95, you have a different set of risk indicators for that machine, as opposed to you would where you're running a heterogeneous environment of Windows 10 and Mac OS X. So it really comes down to a lot of what you have as assets as to how you term risk indicators there, and it comes, it becomes more organizationally dependent based on what you're doing and what you're operating from. That's really the key about where your strategy is. You have to work down to those risk indicators, and people make suggestions, but I don't know that there's a universal across-the-board risk indicator that everyone can apply equally or disseminate equally. Sorry,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Peter, I just want to thank you for your presentation. I thought it was very informative, and we appreciate you taking the time to share the information with us today.
Thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great day. And we can take the following questions as is noted in the chat for everyone, and I hope this was useful for you all. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month. Bye now.